Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Serving with the Seventh, and we're here studying, discussing, and understanding the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide. Right now, we're going to go into our introduction to this book. So if you've got the 7th edition, you can feel free to follow along with us. We're not going to be following it in strict rotation. Instead, this is going to be more like a masterclass where we believe everyone has the understanding of the 5 process groups already, the 10 knowledge areas, Scrum at a reasonable level, Kanban, flow-based Agile, iteration-based Agile, all that pretty fundamental stuff. All right, so we're going to start off with this introduction, and then we'll go into chapter 2, which is a system for value delivery. And in a system for value delivery, PMI, they're pretty focused on creating value as opposed to just a deliverable. Roy, I know you love that one, focusing on value, right?
Absolutely. I can't tell you, so I want to be very open and honest about something. I was never a fan of the PMI in the past or the PMP because it was so process focused. And as long as you're checking all the boxes, you're going to be successful, right? Having been a developer and a manager for so long, it just didn't work that way. So the fact that they're focusing now on people and value delivery rather than the process is just really exciting. I think it's going to significantly change how project managers view the world and how we get work done. So very, very happy they're going this direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Roy. And we're going to talk about organizational governance systems. We're going to talk about functions associated with projects. We're going to talk about the project environment, as the PMI have coined it here, and product management considerations. Not project management, product management considerations. We're going to talk about that as well. And that is pretty much the first part of the book, because if you break down the book, what you're going to find is you're going to find one half of it is the standard for project management, and the other half of it is getting into the domains. Okay, so for this week and next week, we're going to be focused more on the principles, what you're seeing on the screen right now, chapters 1, 2, and then 3 is project management principles, as you can see here, right? The project management principles, there are 12 of them. But let's jump into background. For those who may be watching after the fact, let's talk a little bit about the history of project management. Project management isn't new. It's been around for a long time, for eons. As you can see on this timeline here, we have the Great Pyramids of Giza, way back when, 1000 BC, Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Actually, the Great Pyramids of Giza was like 2000 and something BC. So it goes way back. But if you take a look at the timeline, you can see there's nothing modern here. That is just to show you that project management has been around for a very long time. If you take a look at this timeline, project management timeline, Pyramids of Giza, 2560 BC, 206 BC, the Great Wall of China, Frederick Taylor and Henry L. Gantt, who were involved in really accelerating how projects were managed in the early 1900s, and then enters earned value from our friends at NASA and the DoD in late 1950s, right? IPMA, another project management organization, came on the scene before PMI. Then PMI came on the scene in 1969. And then the first PMP exam was in 1984. Prince 2 was in 1989. And that's when the UK government stepped up their game in project management. Lean manufacturing had actually been around, Roy. This is not extremely accurate to say 1991, but it became more industry known in 1991. It's been around since the 50s, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Back, the days where Deming was involved and Taiichi Ono, they were the pioneers in lean concepts. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then in 1993, the first Scrum project, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber came on the scene with Scrum. Scrum was formalized in 1995. The Agile Manifesto was penned in 2001. And here we are in 2021 talking about hybridization and talking about the meeting of the worlds of Agile and predictive. But who is the PMI? You know them all too well. I believe everyone on this call has had some type of PMI certification or training, right? So the PMI is a leading global association for project management. They were founded in 1969. It's a nonprofit organization. They have been involved in standardizing project management, program management, portfolio management. PMI woke up a little bit late in the game to Agile, but right, Roy, they woke up a bit late, didn't they?
Yeah, I think to their credit, they recognize that their competitors in the Agile space, like Scrum Alliance and Agile Alliance and some of the other certifying bodies, were really gaining ground, and more Agile was coming out in the industry. So they recognized that they were losing a lot of ground. So they to their credit, they had to adapt, and they did. So I'm very happy that they're bringing in more Agile concepts in play.
Absolutely, Roy. And at the end of this slide, you can see PMP, PGMP, but we could go on, and we could add ACP, we could add so many. And they've stepped up their game with Agile certifications. For those who want to know what Roy and I think about those Agile certifications, go to YouTube and just search for, Agile certifications, Discipline Agile, comments, reviews from Roy and Phil. You'll find them there. But still going back
about that, don't we?
Roy, let's not even open Pandora's box right now, because we know we know what's going to happen if we go down that track. But
that's all we'll talk about.
Yeah, that's all for now. But we applaud what they're doing, Roy, don't we?
Absolutely.
We applaud what they're doing. It's good. It's a step in the right direction. We'll talk about that a little bit more, maybe some other time. But going back to the early 80s, when PMI started the PMP, you can see there were 40 people. Fast forward to now in 2020, 2021, there were 1 million people when we put this slide together, 1 million. And it's, certifications are growing astronomically. Roy and I are not saying certifications are the main thing that you should focus on. No, because we have a lot of certified people, Roy, who cannot hold down a sprint, right?
Absolutely. A quick class does not mean that you have the experience to know what you're doing. You gain knowledge, and the certification doesn't even, it's a good indicator, but it doesn't mean that you have the experience you need to actually, follow through with that knowledge that you've gained.
Absolutely. And that is why we actually put this together, to help our colleagues better get their arms around this so they can teach it to people. And one of the things I would recommend, because some of you are in the teaching industry, just when you're teaching and educating, just remind people that it's not about the certification. It's not about the knowledge. It's actually the execution, the practice and learning, failing forward. You're going to make mistakes, and from those mistakes, you're going to learn. That's what it's all about. All right, a little bit of trivia for us to test our polling system. Now, this is anonymous. No one will know who voted what, but the Agile Manifesto was written when? All right, we have a little countdown. We do 3, 2, and 1. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll, and let's share the results. Okay, so taking a look at the results, majority of us chose 2001, some chose 1991. Roy, what was happening in 1991 with Agile?
That was when Scrum was being introduced. So a key moment in time, but it wasn't formalized as a community until 2001, when the manifesto came out.
There we go. 2001 is the right answer. Okay. Agile stuff, yeah, it started in many respects, but 2001 is when the manifesto was written. All right, Roy, so walk us through this Agile evolution of sorts.
Absolutely. So a lot of people don't really actually recognize, but Agile's not a new thing. It's been around for quite a long time. At least the roots of Agile have been around for a while. And it started out way back in the post-World War II days in 1948 with Deming, and then eventually Taiichi Ono, some other industry leaders in process and efficiencies, things like that. So it started out essentially with lean in the manufacturing space, similar to how the PMP and waterfall methodologies started out in construction. If you look at a lot of the examples that were in those slides earlier, there were construction examples. So manufacturing is where Agile came out. It was about efficiencies and leaning out And something that Lean had, and specifically Toyota Production System, was the value of the people, the minds of the people doing the work. Toyota Production System was very big on enabling and empowering the people doing the work to make decisions. And that was a huge, huge change from traditional project management. And then we moved on into some other processes like, unified process, DSDM, some things like that. But along the way, also Scrum was being introduced. It was being experimented with. Now, let's fast forward a little bit to 1994. RAD was a big thing in the software space, rapid application development. And it was really kind of funny. I remember the days when RAD came out. It was, we don't need programmers anymore. We've got RAD, we're good to go. Well, that didn't exactly work out the way that they anticipated, but it was an evolutionary step in more rapid application or rapid delivery processes. And that's where Scrum really became more official. 1996, we came up with some new processes, Crystal Clear, which really isn't being used anymore, but it was, again, another evolutionary step. And extreme programming, which was a major step in the right direction. That was a critical aspect, but primarily for engineering practices, but it also brought some great concepts like small releases and bringing games to the process. So extreme programming was a significant leap forward. 1997, a new concept came out, which was feature-driven development. Again, not necessarily used by itself these days. It's really used as part of program management in an agile space. And then another significant event was the Agile Manifesto in 2001. This is also called the Snowbird event. Their Snowbird Summit. That's when a group of industry thought leaders, such as folks like, Schwaber and Sutherland and some of those other folks got together. They were not the only ones. And just keep that in mind, they are very prominent figures. They are certainly not the only figures in the Agile community. They've had valuable contributions, of course, but not the only people in the Agile space that fathered this stuff. Scrum Alliance was also formed right around that same time. And then we had a strange little thing that happened called the Declaration of Interdependence. And the interdependence is where we're talking about how we rely on each other. And it's not about the processes, relying on each other and relying about different kinds of processes. It was a method to help us understand that it's the people doing the work and how it's not just one process. We rely on each other, right? 2017, and an amazing organization called Agile Alliance was formed. I'm a big fan of them. They are not a certification body, but instead they are a community of Agile practitioners that's not specific to any practice. That's why it's called Agile Alliance and not Scrum Alliance. They welcome all practices and discussions, and they do produce some great conventions and some materials as well. And they start partnering with the PMI to start publish the Agile Practice Guide. Now, I was actually participated in the production of the Agile Practice Guide. Not that I produced content, but I was participating in the process to help them with that guide. It was an interesting process. And the Agile Practice Guide is actually really good stuff. And I'm not saying because I was part of it, but simply because there's some really good content in that book. It's well worth reading. All right, Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Roy. And speaking of the Agile Practice Guide, let's test our knowledge ammo with this one. Walk down memory lane for some of you who are already PMPs. We're going to give you this poll to answer and take you back to the PMP school. So it simply reads, what is this image known as? From way back in the day, for some of you. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you. Let's end the poll. Seems like your chops are still intact, aren't they, Roy?
Nicely done. I'm impressed.
So this is the Stacy complexity model, but Roy, can you walk us through what exactly this model means to us and why it's so important for hybrid thinking?
Absolutely. So what this model does is it attempts to give you some indicators of when you should use which kind of processes. It's based on the domain that you're currently working on. And there are a few different domains that we're talking about: the simple, the complicated, the complex, and anarchy. We're all familiar with anarchy, right? So let's start very quickly talk about the simple domain. This is where we have very close to agreement and certainty. We understand what we're doing. It's very clear. In those kinds of spaces where it's well understood, then a predictive process is perfectly reasonable to use. Once you start moving outward, though, it becomes a little more difficult. Predictive processes, when you're dealing with uncertainty and disagreement, predictive processes start to fall a little bit flat, right? Now, in the complicated space, you still have somewhat certainty, you still have some level of agreement. And the idea there is that, you might start in, still waterfall traditional approaches, predictive approaches are perfectly acceptable in that space. And so let me give an example of a complicated domain. So the example I love to use here is assembling a watch. So if you're assembling a watch, all of the steps known for how to assemble a watch, they're very well known. You have an understanding and agreement, you know what you're doing. So as long as you follow every single step, then you're going to be successful. Any deviation from those steps would be a defect. It wouldn't work properly. Well, that works perfectly well because that's a predictive process. Now, once you get into the complex space, you have a lot less certainty, a lot less agreement. And this is where you need to move away from the predictive approaches because you can't define everything up front simply because you don't know everything up front. That's the whole concept, right? So this is where a more adaptive process would be necessary. And that's what Agile falls in. Agile falls into the adaptive processes. And this is where you start needing the ability to experiment and learn, gain feedback, make mistakes, go back, redo things because of that level of uncertainty. Now, the complex domain, the example I like there is driving to work. So if you're driving to work, there's 1,000 different things that could get in your way from following your plan of how you would get to work. Little variabilities, variances in driving patterns, construction, weather, all kinds of things could get in your way and slow you down or at least alter your course in how you get to work. Well, that's the complex space. Now, if you look at the software space in particular, that's where complexity really exists. The software space is very, very complex. There's a lot of uncertainty. Just think about it this way. Anytime you do something in software, it's never been done before. Even if it's a simple change, it's something that's brand new. It's never been done before. So it inherently has uncertainty and disagreements. I always love to say you put two programmers in a room and ask them to solve a problem. They're going to come up with 20 different ways of doing it, right? That's how much level of disagreement that you can have in the software space. So the complex world is where that fits. Now, often we also have the anarchy space. That's where there's no agreement, there's no certainty, like research and development as an example. So we don't have a lot of agreement in that space. So R&D is also a really good space for the agile, the adaptive process to fit in. All right, back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Roy. For those of you who are wondering, well, I've not seen this before. Well, go to page 165 in the current 7th edition, and you have a breakdown of the Stacy matrix. Now, Roy, I mean, what good is a description without an image when we're talking about a matrix? You know what I'm saying?
You really need the matrix.
Yeah, you need the matrix. So anyway, what is on page 165 in the 7th edition, under 4.2.5.2, let's just put it up here for those folks who may be going through this after the fact. 4.2.5.2, and we're talking about page 165. It helps to have the matrix. It helps. And all the great stuff Roy has said, put it in context with this matrix on the screen. Again, page 165, they call it the Stacy matrix. All right. With that said, let's talk a little bit more about Agile in this poll. An Agile approach to planning what? Give you 30 seconds for this one. It's pretty straight. All right, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so Roy, this was your evil invention. You want to speak to it? What is the answer and why is it?
Yeah. So in this one, an agile approach to planning results in plans that encourage change and that are easily changed. So A would be your correct answer. So, and the whole reason for this is just keep in mind what we talked about with the Stacy model. Change is expected. So if change is expected, you can't have a fully defined schedule and budget. You can't have a fully defined set of product features because we just don't know what all of them are yet. We'll have to discover some of those things. And the challenge, if you try to define everything up front, is you have a very high level of likelihood that this is not going to be the right stuff. So you just waste a lot of time and money defining it. That's really the concept about allowing change to happen.
Absolutely. And if we had said a predictive approach to planning, then we would say, yeah, fully define everything, fully plan everything. But in the world of Agile, it just is not so. We do our best in some sort of road mapping and release planning, don't we, Roy? We try our best, but we're not saying this is a plan. It's more like, what should we call it? What would you call a roadmap, Roy?
Yeah,
Another
a
word.
roadmap it is kind of a plan, but I can tell you what it's not, and it's not a commitment. Right. That's the big thing. And that's a huge difference between traditional predictive approaches, which assumes the schedule and budget are commitments. In Agile, they're not. It's just an idea. It's a kind of an ask for what we think we want, but we just don't know for certain.
I like that. Not a commitment. Very important. I know when people see roadmaps and release plans, they get all excited. Oh, this is all we're going to get. But it's not all you're going to get. You could get less. You could get more. You could get something totally different, right?
Absolutely, and like the comment that we have, it's a directional path. It's what we think we're going to achieve and when we think we're going to achieve it. But along the way, discovery is going to happen. And discovery could be a good thing. We always think of discovery as, oh no, the world's falling apart, right? We've discovered all kinds of bad stuff. Well, you might have discovered a whole bunch of good stuff too. And you can get things done faster, right?
Absolutely. Speaking about plans, let's talk about this world of traditional versus the world of agile, if you will. So in traditional, everything is fixed. We try to lock down the scope. And then if there needs to be any changes, something's got to give. Something's got to give. But for the most part, we fix down scope because we think that in fixing down scope, we're going to get to our targets. And it doesn't always follow, as we've discovered. But in the world of Agile, it's the reverse. It's upside down. Instead, we fix down our schedule and budget. We know what our sprint is, talking about iteration-based Agile. We're talking about a 2-week sprint, then that's locking down your schedule. So we say it's fixed, the budget is fixed. Roy, in this context of budget being fixed in Agile, I've had people scratch their head and say, really, is budget fixed? How do you explain that?
Yeah, so absolutely, you fix your budget, and that's a critical element. You fix your schedule, fix your budget. And the intent is that we're trying to discourage some good things or bad things rather, and encourage some good things. So the things we're trying to encourage is a focus on priority and not on dollars. If you know how much you're going to spend and how much time you need to spend that money, then you can focus then on what scope is most important. It forces the discussion about prioritization. So that means that we're going to get the most valuable stuff. It's a value delivery process. So since it says value driven rather than plan driven, we're focusing on the value that we're delivering within the time box and within the dollars. It also discourages us from hiring a whole bunch of people in variable labor costs and all that kind of good stuff. We want to try to fix our team and make sure that they are stable, which gives us a fixed budget and a fixed schedule as well, right? But in this approach, always the scope is going to be variable as we discover things along the way, right, Phil?
Absolutely, Roy. Let's go to another poll really quick. And these polls, again, they're all anonymous, but they help to provoke our thinking, all right? This one says, Agile is best used when there is. So if you recall some of the discussions we had in the very beginning, this should be a piece of cake. Go for it. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Okay, so the answer we have for this is, as majority have guessed, C. So Roy, why would we say Agile is best used when change is likely? Because B sounds, it almost sounds, okay, it's not a bad thing for change to be unlikely, but that's predictive, isn't it?
That's best. So the way I like to say it is that Agile can be used in those kinds of environments where you're not expecting a lot of change. However, you could also just as easily use predictive approaches, simply because predictive approaches work best when change is unlikely. Now, the adaptive approaches such as Agile can also work in those environments where there is low change. The difference, though, is that it works extremely well in those environments where you need that experimentation, where you don't understand everything. You're going to try something and fail and get feedback and discovery. So that's the value that we get with Agile, working in those environments that are highly volatile.
I like that, Roy. Absolutely. Because I mean, PMI studies have shown that using an agile way of thinking or being agile in your thought helps even your predictive projects.
So. Absolutely. You know, you and I both encourage a lot of agile practices. Even if you're doing full-blown waterfall traditional approaches, there's lots of good stuff that you can steal from Agile to make your waterfall traditional approaches better.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Thank you for the chats. I see that. Brittany says this is boot camp all over again. Yeah. And
directional. Review,
it's a review. All right. Now, speaking of not making this be boot camp all over again, I'm just going to call on some volunteers. All right. As we begin going through this stuff, I want you to give us your quick 10-second take on it. So if you would like to jump in this next section, please do so. All right. This is really going through what I have coined as the process group pentagon, because just common sense, every project is initiated. We already know that every project you plan, even in the world of Agile. Come on, Roy, let's talk about this once and for all, because some people, they tend to think that this is, it's predictive. Mm-hmm. Every project, even in the world of Agile, you don't just start working them. You don't just wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to code and test this brand new system. No, there has to be an authorization, right?
Absolutely. Authorization, and also just making sure you're working on the right stuff. What you would discover, though, even in an Agile project, we do a level of initiation. It's just typically faster. Mm-hmm. Right. It's we still need the same basic stuff, but we're not going to, document everything at the beginning and plan everything at the beginning. It's going to be lighter weight, shorter planning cycles, shorter initiation. And then we get to building faster. You still got to initiate, though. Still have to do that.
Right. And I mean, you plan like you never did in the world of predictive, even in an Agile setting. We plan daily, don't we?
Absolutely.
Different levels. You've talked about the Agile onion. Well, what are some of those levels that we plan at in the Agile onion?
Yeah, so there's either 5 or 6 different levels depending on which model you like to use. I typically like, the most popular is the 5-level model, and the top level of the 5 is visioning, right? So visioning is an aspect of the initiation phase, right? And I hate calling it a phase because we don't really do phases in Agile. Mm-hmm. It's the initiation planning session, right? So what we're trying to identify is, what are we building? Why are we building it? Who is it going to impact? How are we going to measure? Some basic kind of charter-ish type things, project charter type work. So we don't throw everything out just because we're doing Agile. So we do some of that basic level stuff, right? The next thing that we do, again, which is related to initiation and some level of planning, is the roadmap. That's the next level of the onion. And the roadmap is high-level view of what we're going to implement, when we're going to implement it. But again, it's really just a direction. It's just a thought of what we think we need, and that it's going to change. The next level below that is something that's optional, called the release planning event. And release planning, it's optional because if you can release more frequently, then you don't necessarily need a separate plan for that. But if you need to plan across multiple iterations, then a release planning event is very helpful. And that's our next level of planning, which is the iteration or sprint level. And that's where we're planning out the work. It's a fairly detailed plan. We're going to plan out what we're going to work on over the next time box, and it's typically about 2 weeks. Finally, down to the most detailed level of planning is our daily planning. And that's typically in the form of a daily Scrum, daily stand-up, whatever you want to call it. That's the opportunity where we plan how we're going to work together over the next 24 hours. And as you know, Phil, a lot of people get that wrong and they use the daily plan as a status meeting. That's not the intent. It's a planning meeting. So 5 levels of planning, lots and lots of planning involved in Agile, right? Back to you, Phil.
Absolutely, Roy. Thank you very much. So you've just learned the Agile Onion. For those of you who are keen on taking any PMI exam like the PMP, you got to know some of these things, right? So the Agile Onion, the idea about it, it's going to help you on your test. This is not 7th edition. In fact, let me just be flat out honest with you folks. Going through the 7th edition helped me see that probably 25, if that percent, 20 to 25 is brand new, brand new, brand new. So if you're taking the exam, just be aware that a lot of what is in here is not it's not breaking news. It's been in other PMI publications. It's been taught, like a lot of what is here. Roy and I had started teaching this way beyond before the 7th edition came out, like way beyond, like the Stacy model and all this stuff you've seen. But it's in the 7th edition. All right. So it's not entirely new. Moving on to executing. Executing is where you get the work done, where you actually roll up your sleeves. And this is where the developers, what do you feel about that word developers in the new Scrum guide, Roy?
Yeah, so I'm always a little bit torn about this one. Developers has an implication of software world, that sort of thing. And it's not just about software. So I kind of don't like that term of developers. The idea is that everyone on the team, no matter what their skill set, no matter what their background, is developing or building something. I would prefer they just call them team members. That would be a pretty reasonable thing to say. But the idea, again, is that if you're testing or building or designing or analyzing or whatever, everyone is building something. So they're just kind of making it a little bit generic. I don't know if they made the mark on that one, though.
Yeah, developers. So anyway, the team members, people doing the work, they execute. And then we have monitoring and control, in which is our inspect, adapt mechanisms all throughout whatever the framework you're using, isn't it, Roy? The inspect, adapt is all throughout Scrum.
Yep, constantly. We're always monitoring how things are going, collecting feedback, changing directions. And there is, even in Agile, a level of monitoring and controlling. It has to exist. We just try to prefer the lighter weight forms because there's a lot of directional change going on, and we need to make sure that we enable that for as low cost as possible.
Let's talk about closing, Roy. I mean, anyone who thinks you don't close out from the world of Agile is delusional. We do, and we're always ready to close at any point. Can you talk about that one?
Yeah, our goal is that closing an Agile project is a final sign off or whatever it has to be, and a push of a button and off you go. You're closed. And the main reason is that we're doing all of the traditional close activities throughout the project. So at any point in time, we would like to have the option of saying we've delivered enough value, back to that value delivery concept. If you've delivered enough value on a project and now you're getting to a point of diminishing returns where you're spending the same amount of time delivering low value stuff, well, wouldn't it make sense to be able to say, this project is over. Let's go spend our money on some other thing that is higher value. And Phil, we're going to get into this pretty soon. This is where you start talking about product focus rather than just project focus. That project construct tends to get in your way when you're thinking organizationally and as a system. We'll talk more about that, but project close, when you're doing actual projects in Agile, it's very, very simple because we should have already done most of this work, right?
Absolutely. You do the closing, step by step, and you don't do everything because it was written. You do what is value, right? Yeah. So let's talk about the concept of knowledge areas. For anyone taking the exam, you got to know your knowledge areas. Just go to the Agile Practice Guide, page 90 to 95, Agile Practice Guide. You're going to begin to see how to view the knowledge areas from an Agile lens. Again, this is another misconception. People think these have gone away. They have not gone away. So for those of you taking the PMP exam, be aware that the knowledge areas, integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder are all important. Again, in this version of the model of the process group pentagon, I put risk in the middle because everything can be viewed from a risk angle, right, Roy? We can view everything from a risk bias.
Absolutely. And Phil, I'm really glad that you put that in there, because you know how I feel about Agile and risk, risk management on Agile projects. I think we typically do a very bad job of it, right? And the main reason is that there's so much stuff built into Agile to reduce our risk and mitigate our risk, but it's usually just not enough. And the point here is that everything that we're doing in the Agile space, focusing on people, doing daily planning, doing, shorter iterations, all this kind of stuff, it's all about managing the risk of not being successful, all of that. So everything that we work toward has a risk lens. And I think that brings some comfort to people that are more traditional. It's all about risk, and managing projects should be all about managing the risk, right?
That's right, Roy. And I want to crave your indulgence. Those of you who are risk aficionados and junkies like Roy and I, you can go on down to YouTube and search for Risk Doctor video channel. That is the Risk Doctor, who is one of our collaborators, who's developed courses with me in the past. His name is Dr. David Hilson. My goodness, check out his channel if you want to go nuts on risk. That is the channel you need to go to. So talking about the 7th edition, one of the things they have done is introduce this concept of 12 project management principles. And that is what you see at the base: stewardship, collaboration, engagement, value, systems thinking, leadership, tailoring, quality, navigating uncertainty, complexity, resiliency, change, all of that stuff Roy and I are going to cover eventually. But the takeaway is this: this framework that the PMI has espoused in previous editions, it doesn't go away. They still have a lot of mention in what they call Standards Plus. It is an online portal that is more like an extension of the 7th edition, if you will. So all this stuff is still there. It's just hidden. So if you're taking the exam, just be aware it is still possible that you'll find this language in it. But more than anything else, this question, based on Roy's teachings with me, this question is going to summarize PMI's thought process about any exam in PMP space. Or, they've got this additional exam that they say PMPs who were certified a long time ago can take. It's a micro certification. That exam, the PMP exam, everything, it really rests on this mindset in this particular question. This is one of my favorite questions based on Roy's teachings last year. So there's your poll. Some of you already know the answer. You don't even need a second. All righty then, 3, 2, and 1. Brilliant. Oh dear, awesome. Roy, this is a first.
This is fantastic. Phil, I think this is probably the biggest deviation from PMI of the days gone, right? And the PMI of the future is that they are starting to focus on the stuff on the bottom rather than that 100% lens of scope, time, budget, right? They've started to realize finally the stuff on the bottom brings value. The stuff on the top doesn't necessarily mean success, right?
Absolutely. There you go. I see those chats. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Ravi. I see that as well. Awesome. Yeah. You got to think both worlds these days, not just predictive, and not just Agile alone. It's both worlds as your project needs to. But I'm telling you, someone who is not thinking Agile is in trouble. Even in a predictive space, you're in trouble. You've got to think Agile. Yeah, all right. Well, I see we got about 7 minutes left to the top of the hour. Why don't we very briefly go through this? So I know you might be looking at the book and saying, wow, Phil and Roy just spoke for an hour and they haven't even gone into... The reason is this knowledge and this think is so important. Once you get into the right channel with the think, everything else just follows suit. All right, so let's take a look at what is new. You've got the PMBOK Guide 6th edition and you've got the 7th. The 6th edition pretty much focused on initiating, planning, all the way to closing that we looked at, and they called that the standard. You see what I said? They called that the standard. But in the 7th edition, what they are calling the standard is the introduction. Roy and I pretty much blew out the introduction and gave you a lot more information to help support everything else coming. The system for value delivery, we're going to talk about that. But one of the major differences is they replaced the 5 process groups as the focus. I didn't say they got rid of them. They didn't get rid of them. They replaced the 5 process groups as the focus with the project management principles as the focus. That is a huge difference. So they're saying the standard is principle thinking versus process thinking. All right. They're not saying forget about the processes. They're just changing the emphasis in this edition. The second thing that they've changed in what they called a guide to the project management body of knowledge, what we used to call the PMBOK guide with the 10 knowledge areas. Here's a dirty little secret. Those haven't gone away. Actually, PMI, they scrambled it around. So you still have some familiar terminology in what we call performance domains. Stakeholders, team, development approach, and life cycle. They just reconfigured the way it was arranged, okay? So pretty much what you have on the left has just been reborn. It reminds me of the Phoenix in the X-Men, reborn. Yeah, she's reborn. Just a different spin is still there. And then something else they did, the appendices and the glossary, they made it leaner and meaner. They took away the hundreds and hundreds of liters of ITTOs and they replaced them with just maybe a dozen, And then something else they did, they blew out PMI Standards Plus, which is an online repository of a lot of templates, a lot of tools, a lot of great stuff. You'll be amazed at how much value you could get by just going through PMI Standards Plus. If you're developing a team, working with a team, you can find videos, articles, templates, all sorts of great stuff to help build the people you're training. All right. So for those of you who are in the world of training, well, this is a portal I would advise you to go look at.
Yeah, and
all right.
Just point something out very quickly there, Phil. So if you take a look at the stuff on the right, you might notice some similarities to something called the Agile Manifesto, right? So great, they're going in this direction. It's less about the steps of project management and more the behaviors of project management. It's a big change.
Big change, Roy, and that's true. And truth be told, I believe them dabbling into, discipline agile and just being bombarded with agile speak, they're like, let's just go make our own. Mm-hmm. So they went to make their 12 principles, which we're going to take a look at in the next half. But just a few key terms and concepts, and then we'll go for our break, and then we'll come back and talk about this some more. These things on the screen are basic concepts talked about when you hit page 4 in the 7th edition. You see them breaking down all of these, and I'm going to give you the top of the waves, right? Outcome, an end result or consequence of a process or project. Roy, let's talk about the importance of outcome over just output.
Oh, it's critical. The concept is if you is to determine what outcome you're trying to achieve, and it's usually related to happy customers or some kind of key performance indicators, things like that. That's the outcome, like improved satisfaction or customer retention, something like that. Those are the things that are outcome focused. Output is just how much stuff you're producing. And while output is valuable, right, we want to make sure that we are tracking the output. The only thing that really matters is, are you getting the outcomes that you're planning for? So if you deliver a whole bunch of output and you have not delivered happy customers, then you have failed. So the focus toward outcome allows you the flexibility of saying, you know what, we're making our customers happy, but we can do it perhaps with less output. Traditional project management is very focused on produce, output. And now they're moving toward the outcome of making happy customers and stakeholders. So that's the importance there. It's a big switch and very important concept.
Absolutely, Roy. And let's be honest, there are projects where you make the product fit for use, conforming to requirements, but the customer is not satisfied. That's a poor outcome.
How many times have you been involved on projects where that happens? Well, I can't count the number. It's, where they it's like, build this for me. You go off and you go build it. And it's like, that's not what, that doesn't work for me. I don't like that.
Absolutely. And Roy, even in training programs, sometimes you knock it out of the park And you still have a customers like, well, but
Yeah, just very quickly, Phil. I had that very same experience. It wasn't me training, fortunately. It was a friend of mine who did it. A customer asked for a specific kind of training. They delivered exactly what the customer was asking for. They delivered the exact training. And at the end of it, it's like, yeah, you know what? This isn't what we wanted. So we're really not happy.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it's
That
what
is,
we do, you know?
yeah, it happens. And hopefully by the time we're done, Roy, we'll give some pointers on how to overcome that.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
Still
Ravi,
on
you
page,
are correct. Great comment.
let's see Ravi's comment. So outcome is customer focused, output is yes. That's a great way of putting it, Ravi.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. All right. So taking a look at page 4, I just want to go through them really briefly because I know you folks on this call already know them. For anyone who is studying for the test or does not have as much insights, it's all on page 4, right? Portfolios are a collection of projects, programs, subsidiary portfolios, and operations managed as a group to achieve strategic objectives. We're going to come more to that in the value delivery system. A product is an artifact that is produced, is quantifiable, and can be either an end item in itself or a component item. A program is a collection of projects, programs, subsidiary programs, you want to call them that, and program activities that are managed to obtain benefits that are not available from managing them individually. We have a project here, a temporary endeavor undertaken to deliver a unique product, service, or result. This definition, I would like to rephrase it as a temporary endeavor undertaken to deliver value. It's not just about the product, service, or result, but it's really about the value at the end. So that is an improvement that we could make on definition of a project, right? It's not about the deliverable, like you heard Roy say. Project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. Project manager, the person assigned by the performing organization to lead the project team that is responsible for achieving the project objectives in a predictive world, right, Roy? Let's talk about project managers in Agile. It's a bit of an unknown, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so there's lots of stuff you can read on the internet that, project managers, that there's no such thing as an agile project manager. And I tend to disagree with that concept. There's still a lot of the concepts that you have from project management. They still have to be done. You still have budgets, you still have scope, you still have schedule, you still have stakeholders, all of those traditional things that you're used to. They still exist. They don't go away just because of the process you're following to deliver it. So the need for project managers is still there. It's very important, but the job needs to change. And instead of being checklist and process focused, you instead have to be more people focused, making sure that the people that are doing the work have what they need, understanding the customer needs at a much deeper level. So the concept of agile project management is different, and that's where PMBOK 7 comes in. It's more about the behaviors and the principles and the values than it is about the processes, right?
Absolutely, Roy. And that leads us to talking about individuals and interactions again. The next one on the screen is a team, a set of individuals performing the work of the project to achieve its objectives. Next, we have a system for value delivery. This is a collection of strategic business activities aimed at building, sustaining, and/or advancing the organization. Portfolios, programs, projects, products, and operations can all be part of an organization system for value delivery. And last but not least, we have value itself. And value is the worth, importance, or usefulness of something. I like PMI's definition in the 6th edition. It says the net quantifiable benefits that a customer can realize from a product, service, or result. So it's the worth, the importance, or usefulness. If something is not useful to a customer, they ain't getting value from it.
And
It
it
says
doesn't have to be
organization.
dollars all the time, does it?
Exactly, that's true. It's not all about the dollars. We have tangible value. We have intangible value. Well, what are some examples of intangible value, Roy?
Well, consider, let's say that you are a nonprofit organization that is providing, services to the community. There's no dollars associated with what you're producing, not necessarily anyway. It's more about the intangible results of serving your community, happier community, the outcome that you're trying to achieve, which may not have anything to do with dollars in those kinds of situations. That's just one example. There's lots more, right, Phil?
That's a great example, Roy. Thanks for that. And it says societal value can include the contribution to groups of people, as Roy said, communities, or the environment. So all that we're telling you, it's all here, it's all buried here. But what we're doing is cutting to the chase and just getting to the heart of a lot of this information so that you don't have to read pages of it before you understand it, so you can teach it more organically to your people. All right, so that is the end of part one. At this time, we'll be taking a little break for 5 minutes, and we'll come back and continue the journey. Welcome back. We are moving on now to our next section in the PMBOK Guide, 7th edition. But there's one thing we want to establish before we go through the system for value delivery. And it's this example of a project lifecycle that Roy and I typically use to introduce people to the world of hybridization. When you're taking a look at projects, instead of looking at them as, oh, this is all predictive or this is all agile, you might need to have a more, I would say, agnostic view, which is what this presents. Every project should have a vision. You should have a business case, should have a charter. You should have some kind of authorization process. Of course, you should plan, you execute, you get work done. You go through a period of inspect and adapt so that you can firm up whatever you're doing, so you can get it better. On some projects, it's more copious, like on iterative projects, your focus is really doing things until they are correct. That's not every project, but to a large degree, you find this on you should have this on every project. You should replan and refine. You should, of course, demo what you're doing. It's a way of engaging stakeholders, and then you deliver. It doesn't have to be just software. You could do this on any project. And ultimately, you should have a period where you retrospect. So, Roy, this is not just peculiar to the world of Agile. It's what every project should do, right? You should have your retrospectives. You should have the ceremonies in some way, right?
And absolutely. I talk about the retrospective all the time in traditional approaches. Traditionally, we do a lessons learned at the end of a session, the end of a project. And I always thought that it was such a poor implementation of a great idea. The implementation is that we wait until a project has potentially failed to talk about how to improve it. Well, that seems like a terrible time to do that, right? It's way, way too late. So instead, maybe we can steal the concept from Agile, which was stolen from traditional approaches, right? Let's face it, and that is, let's do a retrospective every couple of weeks. Let's do a lessons learned session every couple of weeks and feed those lessons into our next couple of weeks. So you're continuously evolving throughout the project rather than waiting till the end when it's way, way too late, right? Make sense, Phil?
Absolutely. It's so brilliant, Roy. All right. Excuse me, moving into a system for value delivery for those of you who are following. Wow, this is tough because Roy and I, we don't like going by the book at all. We don't like going by the book. But anyway, just to get everyone caught up to speed, those of you that actually have the 7th edition, we just got done with page 5. Page 5 then goes into the audience for the standard, and we know anyone is the audience, any organization, any team member, any project manager, project lead, team member, anyone. All right, so moving on to page 7, this is where we come upon a system for value delivery. That's what we're going into next, just to make it extremely clear. All right, and here we have 5 sections. 5 sections. Let's go over the sections one more time. We did take a look at them in the very beginning, but the 5 sections are as follows. And I'm just going to put a red boundary around them. So we have creating value, we have organizational governance systems, we have functions associated with projects, we have the project environment, and then we have product management considerations. And then when we get done with this, because this is all number 2 right here, when we get done with number 2, we will then move into number 3, which is project management principles. But right now, we're really focused on just this second part. Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at now. Okay, so follow us to page 7, and let's start with the topic of creating value. So it reads, projects exist within a larger system, such as a governmental agency, organization, or contractual arrangement. The idea is that your project doesn't just exist on its own, it exists within a wider system. Turning the page over to 2.1.1. It reads here, various components such as portfolios, programs, projects, products, and operations that can be used individually and collectively to create value is what we call that system. Those various components, right? There are many systems, but working together, these different components comprise a system for delivering value that is aligned with the organization's strategy. So think of it as pieces of a system working together to deliver value. If you go to page 9, this is where you see this image. We've made it look a little bit enticingly interesting. It doesn't look this way in the guide, so we've added a little bit of color. But the idea is that organizations need to deliver value, and they do this using this system for value delivery. What I like about PMI's breakdown here is they have given a solid term to it. For the longest time, this has been around in project space, portfolios, programs, and projects. This is not new. But to define it again, a portfolio is a collection of projects, programs, sub-programs, just name it, whatever you want to call the work, right? It's a collection of all the work that you're doing to deliver value. That's the key thing, value, 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 right? So you've got portfolio A, you can see we have program A1. Let's just zoom into it so that we can focus a little bit more on it. Portfolio A has these programs, A1 and A2. And A1, the program, has a bunch of projects. So does program A2. Go into portfolio B, you can see that there are some projects in the portfolio that are not linked to any program, but they're in the portfolio B. And then you can see program B1 has got projects in it. So the takeaway is that you can have projects, standalone projects that do not belong to a program, and you can have programs with projects in it, all in a portfolio. And lastly, talking about the system itself, you can also see that we have programs that do not belong to a portfolio, but they're part of what is being done overall as a system for value delivery. That is one of the changes you can see from the 6th edition. They didn't have an image such as this, but now we see PMI coming out. They're coming out of the gate swinging, saying you got to think about value, value, value. How do you like this interpretation, Roy?
Yeah, I think it's better. And I really wanted to call this out. So thank you for giving me the opportunity for this one. This is a very subtle, nuanced change that's an indicator of something bigger that's going to be coming down the pike, right? In the past, the PMI has been very focused on the project as an entity. It is a thing that is generally standalone. And yes, of course, it could be part of a program or portfolio, but they never treated the organization as a system in the past. Now they're starting to introduce that language, which is very important for what is likely to come further down the road. In the past, you would run a project to completion because the project was a standalone entity and had to be completed in order to say this project was completed. What they're going to be moving toward, and this is just my opinion, this is what's going to be moving toward, is more the concept of the organization as a system, where you're focusing on the most important value from whatever project that work happens to come from. So as an example, if you have one team that is working on multiple projects, they should be focused on the highest value component, the highest value piece of any project that they happen to be working on. So the prioritization then kicks in. Value, piece of, feature from project A is more valuable than feature B from project B. So let's do feature A first, right? Let's do the most important, most valuable thing, regardless of the project. Now, what I suspect is eventually you're going to start seeing more terminology coming from the lean world, where they start introducing the concept of value streams. And value streams is just like the name implies, a stream of continuous value rather than the focus of the project. So I think this is a hint of things to come, more systems thinking, more value stream thinking. So maybe do some studying about value streams and how they work, because that's likely what's coming in future editions of the PMBOK. Does that make sense, Phil?
Absolutely, Roy. You are smack dab in line with what PMI is saying right now. In fact, systems thinking is one of the principles that they've been espousing. So you're right on the money. It's not about my project, my program. It's really all is a system. So there should be no segregation. You should all be working together and switching from one priority of value to the next when we need to, especially when resources are scarce. It's just the way of life that PMI is beginning to espouse. They've woken up. Yeah. Now, taking this a step further, if we look at the next page, going to page 10, we can see the same image. But what PMI has done here is they have put this system for value delivery within an internal environment. So we now get the impression that all of these are working together within our organizational environment. But going a step further, we also have an external environment. And it reads here, the components in a value delivery system create deliverables used to produce outcomes. An outcome is an end result or consequence of a process or a project. This is on page 10. Focusing on outcomes, choices, and decisions emphasizes the long-range performance of the project. The outcomes create benefits which are gains realized by the organization. Benefits in turn create value, which is something of worth, importance, or usefulness. And remember Roy's example, doesn't always have to be money related, could be good work you're doing in your community and so on. Okay. All right. Now, when we look at this, I like giving a visual that will help it stick. We're really big on visuals. So when we take a look at a system for value delivery to help it stick, think about the components in an aquarium, right? You could think about portfolios as being the big boulders. You could think about your programs as being rocks. Think about your projects being pebbles. Think about operations, the lifeblood that keeps the organization going, the water itself. Think about the outcomes. It could be the sand. And think about the benefits, like the plants. And of course, stakeholders are going to be the fish. Just something for you to latch on to remember some of these components. But also within this system, if you go to page 11, PMI, they espouse the idea of information flow. And it reads, a value delivery system works most efficiently when information and feedback are shared consistently, because all of this will fall flat without the relevant feedback. So senior leadership communicates a strategy that flows into the portfolios. The desired outcomes, benefits, and value that we're seeking flows from portfolios down to programs and projects, and then deliverables with support and maintenance information. Those are given to operations. In turn, operations flows back information for updates, fixes, and adjustments. Programs and projects flow back into the portfolio level, performance information and progress. And then the portfolios flow back to senior leadership, portfolio performance information. And overall, we have operations flowing back outcomes, benefits, value, and performance analysis. So the idea is not just to have the system, but actually to use it for feedback. Roy, any comments?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if you look at the overall system, all these collections of components, it's the interactions between the components that we really want to be focusing on. It's how, projects affect other projects and projects affects programs. So all of these things are tightly interconnected. And we need to make sure that we're focusing not just on the thing, not just the project, but the relationships between those projects in order for all of that work to work successfully. That means more of a focus as the organization as a system and not just a collection of programs and projects. Does that make sense, Phil?
Absolutely. Spot on. We've seen a lot more of the individuals and interactions over the processes and tools, and we're seeing more of the value, even within this example of information flow, is value. We want that feedback. We want to understand how to improve and things like that.
Yeah.
All right. Going over to page 12, we see a word that Roy and I have discussed time and time again in our project management classes. It's the word governance. And it reads here, a governance framework can include elements of oversight, control, that word, value assessment, integration among components, and decision-making capability. So if you're on page 12, This is where you see a very big section on governance, but I like the simple definition from the 6th edition. It just reads, governance is a framework within which authority is exercised. And Roy, this is not a bad word, even if we're in a world of Agile. The word governance is not a bad word, is it?
You have to deal with governance, and we don't necessarily like the word because it has such a negative connotation of governance and control and authority and things like that. And that's a very anti-agile kind of concept. All of those things are anti-agile, but the reality is you do need governance, right? You do need to make sure that things are being done properly, that you've got some standards and practices in place to protect your organization. That's really what it comes down to. Imagine a group of people working on a project and they're not aware of security governance, security concerns, things like that. They could build anything and cause great harm to the organization. The governance, like it or not, is a part of any organization and out of necessity as well.
Absolutely, Roy. Still here on page 12, we go into 2.3. This is a no-brainer. This is functions associated with projects. This is what you folks are so used to. It says functions related to the project can be fulfilled by one person, by a group of people, or combined into defined roles. So PMI, they're taking this step back to say, wait a minute, it's not just the project manager who does this. This could also be the team. And I think the Agile influence from the Agile Alliance is probably beginning to take over, Roy, like Banner.
Yeah, this is a big one. Let's take a second here to pick this one apart a little bit. What they're essentially saying, this, if you read the subtext, is that a project manager, a role of project manager, a person as the project manager is not necessarily always needed on every single project. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing for project managers. All we're really saying here is that if there isn't sufficient complexity, then maybe you don't need a dedicated person fulfilling the role of project manager. You still have project management needs, you still have budget, you still have scope, all that other kind of good stuff. Maybe you don't always need a dedicated project manager to fulfill those roles. That's a big change for the PMI.
Huge, huge indeed. And when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of these, we talk about providing oversight and coordination. Roy, let's pick that one apart. Let's jump into any of these frameworks or just the world of Agile in general. We don't have one focal point, one central figure anymore. It's distributed and dispersed, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's a key concept in the Agile space, is that it is distributed decision-making. And it ties back to a larger concept of servant leadership. Right, where you don't, in the past, it was always we have one person making decisions and one person to tell us what to do, and command and control kind of approaches. Well, we're moving away from that, and the concept is that we have leaders who lead, not command. They give organizational clarity, they give direction, they say this is where we're going, this is why we're doing it, and it builds that environment or that community within an organization, not just the hierarchy in a command and control structure. More a community of smart people that have an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, why we're trying to accomplish it, and then we're using the intelligence of those people that are doing the work. So a very different approach than what we've done traditionally, right, Phil?
Absolutely. And this is on page 13 for those of you who are following. The intent is not to read the entire paragraph, but the intent is to look more from a master class point of view. All right, so provide oversight and coordination, and it reads, people in this function help the project team achieve the project objectives, typically by orchestrating the work of the project. Again, what Roy has just said is that we need to depart from just seeing one central figure and seeing it, distributed across team members. The next one here says, present objectives and feedback. And it says, people in this function contribute perspectives, insight, and clear direction from customers and end users. Now, Roy, let's talk about two of the roles in Scrum that may be involved in presenting objectives and feedback, or maybe three roles.
Yeah, maybe three roles, right? It's not just necessarily limited to one. So we've got our product owner, we've got stakeholders, right, that are going to be providing feedback and making sure we're going the right direction. And what about the team, Phil? Do you think they're involved in that kind of a concept of presenting objectives?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Distributed decision making, which means the team has a component. They have an opportunity to say, you know what, this is the wrong direction. We're doing the wrong thing. Being able to raise their hand and saying, there's a better way, or this is not the right way for us to go. And that's an important aspect of decentralized decision making as well, right?
Indeed. It says here on page 14, projects need clear direction from customers and end users regarding project requirements, outcomes, and expectations. In adaptive and hybrid environments, the need for ongoing feedback is greater because the teams are exploring and developing product elements within specific increments. All right, let's go to 233. It says facilitate and support. The function of facilitation and support may be closely related to providing oversight and coordination depending on the nature of the project. Now that word oversight, let's debate that, or let's discuss that, Roy.
Yeah, another word that I hate to use, but there is always some need for oversight, of course, making sure that we're following the right practices, all that kind of good stuff. However, the way that you implement that oversight, that's really up to interpretation. A team could have oversight upon itself. The team members having oversight over each other and over themselves as well. So it's that mutual, shared, and personal accountability and ownership of the work that's being done. Oversight doesn't have to be a central body of people, staring at everything that you're doing in minutia. It's more about making sure that we're doing good stuff and we're doing it in a good way and not causing harm to the organization and those people that we're building the work for. So oversight is something that is also, in a way, distributed. Of course, there needs to be certain definitions of what good practices are, and making sure that we're not causing harm. Just simple little things like workplace safety. Well, in a way, that's kind of a form of oversight. You've got a group of people defining what workplace safety is all about. That's an important thing to have. All right. So oversight is not necessarily a bad thing. It's how it's implemented that typically is where it goes astray.
Brilliant perspective, Roy. Let's go to page 14 still, 234. It says, perform work and contribute insights. And it just reads, this group of people provides the knowledge, skills, and experience necessary to produce the products and realize the outcomes of the project. So what they're doing now is they're balancing it out by showing you it's not just a project manager, you need the team. I like this quote from the editor-in-chief of Vogue. She says, you are nothing, Anna Winter. She says, you're nothing without the team. And it's true. Without a team, what would you do?
Yep.
All right. Let's move on to the next one on page 15. It's apply expertise. It says, people in this function provide the knowledge, vision, and expertise in a number of specific subjects for a project. They offer advice and support throughout the organization and contribute to the project team's learning process and work accuracy. The people can be external to the organization or can be internal project team members. That's apply expertise. The next one, 2.3.6, provide business direction and insight. It says people in this function guide the clarity and direction of the project or product outcome. The function involves prioritizing the requirements or backlog items based on business value, dependencies, and technical or operational risk. Now, Roy, that has product owner spelled all over it, doesn't it?
Absolutely, all over the place. And the product owner is a role that is obviously very critical in making sure that we're going the right direction at all times, right?
Absolutely. Next one is provide resources and direction. It says people in this function promote the project and communicate the organization's vision, goals, and expectations to the project team and broader stakeholder community. They advocate for the project and the project team by helping to secure the decisions, resources, and authority that allow project activities to progress. So who would we put into this frame of thinking?
There could be stakeholders, leadership, even product ownership, and to a certain extent, the Scrum Master, at least from an escalation perspective. But I also want to point something out here in general about the direction the PMI is going. The word resources. Now, Phil, you know how I feel about the word resource, right? It's calling people resources is quite honestly very offensive to a lot of people in the Agile community, but they're getting better at this. Now they're starting to use the word people and team
Mm.
members and things like that, which is much better. And now they're more correctly applying the word resources, as in the physical equipment and the safety and the other kinds of things that people need in order to be able to do their jobs. Yeah, absolutely, Brittany. It's just such a bad idea to call people resources. It's just not a good way of dealing with human beings. So, they're still a bit inconsistent in their application of the word resource, but they're getting a lot better at it, which is a very positive direction.
Indeed, indeed. Yes. I always find that very amusing, because I remember when Roy and I started training this course, that was one of the first things Roy said: call your people resources. They deserve better.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, we have that word again, the G word, maintain governance. People who fill a governance function approve and support recommendations made by the project team and monitor project progress in achieving the desired outcome. So, Roy, let's real quick talk about the role of the functional managers, or functional heads, if you will, from an Agile perspective. A lot of times people think, oh, freedom, the team, that's it. No more functional. That's not entirely true, is it?
Not true at all. And I hear all the time, it's like, well, the team is self-governing and self-managing and self-organizing. They don't need to be told what to do. It's like, okay, great. We can fire most of our functional managers, right? Well, maybe I don't necessarily agree with that. So the role of the functional manager changes significantly, though. You consider that we don't necessarily need a single manager over a team as we would in a more traditional hierarchical kind of organization. You tend to flatten it out more. So maybe you don't need as many functional managers, but maybe you still do. That's really based on the context of the organization. But the job of those managers changes significantly. Instead of being the people that are telling everyone what to do and tasking out resources, right, and assigning work and all that kind of good stuff, telling people what to do, the job changes to be much more of a mentor, leadership kind of role. Making sure that the team members have what they need to do their jobs. The way I like to kind of equate it is functional managers are more about organizing a community of practice, right? So they might be around a specific skill set or technology or platform or some other domain of expertise, something like that. So they're making sure that the people that are working in their hierarchy have the skills necessary for that particular community of practice. So it's a different approach than traditional management. It's less about telling people and more about leading and guiding and mentoring, right? Which is a very positive way.
Thank you, Roy. And we got a great question, and this is from Ravi. And Ravi says, what is the rationale of having 2.3.8 maintain governance outside of 2.2, right, which is organizational governance systems? Well, I think what PMI is trying to do is show the governance system as a system versus this function of maintaining governance as something that you do as an individual or a group of individuals.
And within the project itself. Exactly. So there's this system of governance, which is organizational, and and then maintaining that governance within the project, making sure that you're adhering to that governance.
Brilliant, Roy. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, we've spoken about 8 things pretty much that PMI says are functions associated with projects. Let's just do a very quick, well, you listen to what we said type of poll. So here we go. As we launch the poll, which of these is not a function associated with a project?
It's a good question, Phil. I like this one. This will test them.
All right. Well done. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, let's end the poll and share the results. Okay, so majority have gone with option C, and that is because if you take a look at page 12 all the way to 15 or 14, what you're going to realize is that controlling the company revenues is not associated with a project. That is more for leadership in the firm, management, senior management, stuff like that. But providing oversight, presenting objectives and feedback, performing work and contributing insights, yeah, those are all things that are mentioned in 2.3. All right. So with that said, let's talk about this concept of the project environment. Project environment is talked about from page 16. So let me just read a little bit of it for you for context. It says, projects exist and operate within internal and external environments that have varying degrees of influence on value delivery. Internal and external environments can influence planning and other project activities. These influences can yield a favorable, unfavorable, or neutral impact on project characteristics, stakeholders, or project teams. So let's jump into page 16. I don't want to dwell on this too much because we could get lost in definition paralysis, but the summary is, once upon a time, PMI had something called enterprise environmental factors and something called organizational process assets. Enterprise environmental factors are factors that can influence the project. Organizational process assets are assets that support the project. Well, PMI have changed the configuration in the 6th edition, and they've just said you've got internal environment, which could be factors or artifacts, and you've got external environment, which could be processes that government says you must follow, therefore regulations, industry standards, and things like that. So let's take a look at them really quick. Internal environment, you have things we call process assets, not assets, process assets. That's the very first one. A process asset is an asset that enables your process, that helps you do better with process. So we're talking about documentation, we're talking about repositories, databases with information from past projects and stuff like that. Governance, documentation, data assets, knowledge assets, security and safety information that pertains to the organization. All of these are internal, right? Your company structure, the way your facilities are distributed, infrastructure that you may possess, information technology software, resource availability, employee capability. These are all internal. They're either factors or they're assets in some way, okay? That's internal environment. We also have the external environment. The external environment are marketplace conditions. You don't have any hold over this, right? Social and cultural influences, regulatory stuff, commercial databases, academic research, industry standards, financial considerations, physical environment. These are all talked about further on page 18. But for you folks who have experience in the real world, these should make absolute sense. But from an Agile perspective, are there any triggers, Roy, when you take a look at these that we don't bucketize things like this? It just happens, right?
Yeah, these are just, facts of life in an Agile space. We're more, again, concerned about some of the internal things like how team members react and maybe some other things. And I mean, actually, so I would encourage the view of social and cultural influences, things like that. We at least consider them. We don't necessarily need to call them out specifically or put them in boxes, things like that. They're just kind of natural, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for your exam, those of you taking the exam and have wondered, okay, what could possibly change? Well, I mean, the concept of internal and external environment was not in previous editions. Would not be surprised if we begin to see that language and this thinking, which we talked about before the break, right? External environment, internal environment, your system for value delivery being wrapped inside the internal environment, and really knowing what PMI say are some of the components in an external or internal environment. With that said, here's a very quick, did you follow what I said? Here we go. Let us relaunch the poll. So external environments include what? What do you think? Quick 30 seconds. All righty, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you very much. All right, a little bit polarized. So there's a little bit of trickery going on like you would find on the PMP exam. Option D, combined resource availability, internal, and commercial databases, external. So it cannot be the right answer. Option C, information technology software that you use, that's internal to the firm. So it's not external. Academic research is what we were looking for. So academic research, That is an example of external environment. Just one more look at that. We have marketplace conditions, social and cultural, regulatory, commercial, bits and pieces. All right, just little things that you can look out for. Okay. Ravi says, isn't the internal and external environment in a sense a part of absolutely the sphere of influence? Very correct. Pretty much. Brittany, you're cracking me up. Yes, very good. So that is very correct. The external, the project manager's sphere of influence, the project manager is in the firm, and the sphere of influence is really things like internal stakeholders, external stakeholders that you can reach. But when we talk about the environment in the 7th edition context, they have taken EEFs and OPAs, enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, and they have meshed them together, much to some of our horror. But to be quite honest, Roy has been sensitizing me more and more to these things are what they are. Facts of life. They're just facts of life. Who cares what you call them? Right, Roy?
Yeah, and I want to call something out that's also a little bit different. These things are not within the sphere of influence of the project manager. They're part of the project or part of the organization, right? So that's another subtle change. It's what you're going to see a lot in the PMBOK 7 is that it's a lot less about the project manager. It's not PM centric. It's about the system. It's about the people doing the work, things like that. So Ravi, great call out. You're absolutely right. They're rephrasing it in the context of a project rather than just a PM, right?
Absolutely. Very good. Thanks for calling that out, Roy, because it's very subtle. We could say that the project manager's sphere of influence is impacted by the internal environment and the external environment they're in. But this is different. When we talk about the sphere of influence in the 6th edition, it was actually talking more about who the project manager can influence, what they can influence. You cannot influence marketplace conditions. You cannot influence regulatory, So it's a little bit of a different spin. But I like the way Roy put it. They're just facts of life. They're things that happen. You're in an internal environment. It's a great environment. It's a hostile environment. It's a limited environment. It's a free environment. You've got resources you need, or you're constrained with the resources available. They're just facts in my mind of life. The PMI will not be splitting hairs on an exam with this, but it's just good to understand their perspective, what they mean, as Roy broke it down. So great stuff. All right. Thank you for the participation. So with that, on page 18, we now go into this world of product management. And this is not new, believe it or not. Once upon a time in previous editions, the PMI will talk about the product lifecycle. And then they will talk about the project lifecycle. The project lifecycle is what is done to deliver the product. But the product lifecycle is everything from the very beginning of conception all the way to the obsolescence of the product. So that is something the PMI is bringing back. They're bringing back the discussion about products. And it says product management can exist in different forms, including but not limited to program management within a product lifecycle, project management within a product lifecycle, and then product management within a program. It's pretty simple. Think about it like this. You got this big old product life cycle, and you could have tiny little projects that you do along the way. And this is broken down on page 19. Again, the way we're going to show it here is a little bit fancier, a little bit more colorful. But if you go to page 19, you see it. Here's a summary, and I'll just go over this with a little tick for each one. So you've got the overall portfolio, right? Inside portfolios, you've got programs and projects. So this is a program. In this program, we can see the very beginning, the initial creation or the introduction of the product. And then we've added more features in project 2. Project 3, we're adding even more features, as you can see. We get to project 4, we're then making revisions, but project 4 is under program B. So you can see how we break out work into maybe programs over the life of a product. And we have within those programs projects. It's that simple. We have more revisions in project 5, more revisions in project 6, and then we get to project 7, and that's retirement. And that is, this can no longer function. And then you can see they've got little buckets here, the introduction, the growth of the product, maturity of the product, and then ultimately decline or retirement. I also look at a product such as certifications like the MCSEs, Roy, back in the day, Wasn't that the best thing ever since sliced bread and everyone was going nuts on them?
I can't tell you how many former MCSEs I have met over my career. Yeah, it was a great thing at the time. Certifications can be incredibly valuable, but over time they do, decline in their value, right?
Absolutely. And that is a good example of what a product could be. But we could also liken this to software. We could liken this to a building. Think about Flash and PMI not PMI, when Adobe pulled the plug on Flash. I'm used to accusing PMI of a lot of things, not this one.
Yeah, you can't call them out for that one.
They can't. No, I can't. PMI, yeah, you're forgiven for what you didn't do. Yeah, it's Adobe. Adobe pulled the plug, and they had a lot of cohorts. They had the Microsofts and the Apples. Everyone just shut down Flash. That's an example of the obsolescence of software. Step 7, you cannot use it anymore, and that's the end.
Yeah, and Phil, I want to call two things out very quickly. One, this chart that you have is also something very similar to what we do in really agile organizations. There's something called lean portfolio, which is a little bit different, actually quite a bit different than traditional portfolio management. And that we talk about things like investment horizons. Agile portfolios are viewed a little bit differently than traditional. It's less about programs and projects and more about collections of value streams and investments. So it's where are you spending your money? And in this case, investment horizons can be you're introducing a new product. So kind of that life cycle is how you're investing in your products. The other thing that I want to call out is the product focus. This is very, very heavily influenced by Agile, a major shift away. And I think you're going to see more and more about this kind of concept, less focus on the project and more focus on the product. And that is a big time Agile focus or Agile influence. And what that really means is that we view in the Agile space, we view that a project is simply a moment in time in the overall life cycle of a product. It's the product we should be focusing on, less so on the project. We do what's right for the product, and we lose a little bit of focus on the project. Again, projects are just a small moment in time. The overall life cycle of a product could be decades. Who knows how long it could be? Projects could be, even if it's a 3-year project, it's still a very small amount of time in the grander scheme. So look for more and more of that, and for your own education and your own mindset, start thinking more about the products, less so about the projects, because that's where the industry is headed.
Brilliant stuff, Roy. I love it. All right, let's wrap this up. This is pretty much it. It reads here on page 18, the disciplines of portfolio, program, and project and product management are becoming more interlinked. While portfolio, program, and product management are beyond the scope of this standard, understanding each discipline and the relationships between them provides a useful context for projects whose deliverables are products. And I believe what Roy said is just a massive takeaway. The mindset needs to be all about what is best for the product, not just being obsessed with process and doing it for doing sake. A lot of projects are just doing all the process for just because it's written. It is written, thou shalt do this process. No, change that mindset.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Okay. Still here on page 19, it says a product is an artifact that is produced, is quantifiable, and can be either an end item itself or a component item. Now, when you take a look at this, when we say product, also bear in mind that not everything is a tangible product in what we do, right, Roy? We have some intangible outcomes and things that we get that are not necessarily product attached.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then the next page, page 20, it goes into some of the breakdowns. Program management within a product lifecycle. So that is what we see in program A and B. Project management within a product lifecycle. That's what we see in projects 1 to 7. And then product management within a program, the idea of the actual product itself, which is not visible on the screen. But there's one more thing for those of you who may be going ahead to take an exam that is 7th edition connected, just be aware of this section here, where they have broken down project usage, sales, and impact. And you can see the impact, talking about the level, you can see that in project 3 and 4, around where you have growth and maturity, that is where you see a whole lot more project usage, sales, and impact. just something to note for the exam. Again, I just see it as facts of life. All right, now we're at the last part before we finish for the day. And this is probably the most exciting. It is project management principles. And the origin of these principles, Roy kind of gave you an inkling. Agile Manifesto, my goodness, values and principles. And honestly, in my mind, when I saw that, I said, PMI, why bother? Just take what you have, use what, but PMI, they got to make their own. They got to make their own. So what we're going to do here from a masterclass mindset, as we go through this over the next couple of weeks, Roy and I are just going to be giving straight up commentaries about how this flushes with the Agile Manifesto values and principles, because there's a lot of parallels, and we'll go over that. But the origin of this, you can see on the screen here, we have the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct values. And their 4 values are responsibility, respect, fairness, and honesty. And if you read with me, it says, the principles, page 21, the principles of project management were identified and developed by engaging a global community of project practitioners. The practitioners represent different industries, cultural backgrounds, and organizations in different roles and with experience in various types of projects. Multiple rounds of feedback resulted in 12 principles that provide guidance for effective project management. And then if you flip the page over, what they're showing you here is that there's overlap. There's overlap between the project management principles and general management principles. It reads, principles of project management can also have areas of overlap with general management principles. For example, both projects and business in general focus on delivering value. The methods may be somewhat different in projects as opposed to operations, but the underlying principle associated with focusing on value can apply to both. And then on the next page, they go into the actual principles. And that's what Roy and I are going to cover real quick over the next few minutes. But this is also what we're going to be covering next week in a lot more detail. So if you're looking at page 23, it says, the principal labels are listed here without any specific weighting or order. So Roy, let's just start knocking these out one by one. Let's talk about the first one, stewardship. What does this remind you of?
Servant leadership. Right, making sure that we're helping those people and making sure doing the work and making sure that they have everything they need. Right.
Absolutely. What about number 2, collaboration?
This is all about the team, right? Talk. Make sure you're communicating, building up great relationships, and that's how you build awesome teams, right?
Absolutely. Number 3, stakeholders, business people and developers must work together daily comes to mind.
Exactly. That feedback and the opportunity to talk directly with your stakeholders, 100%.
Lovely. The next one is value, focus on value. Roy has talked about this all day today. And when we talk about value let's dig into the manifesto in the recesses of our mind, Roy. Do any of those things from the Agile Manifesto jump out?
I'm thinking about 2 or 3 different principles jump out about value. Principle number 1, satisfy your customers through early and continuous delivery of value. Principles 2 and 3, where we're talking about delivering frequently, short timescales, things like that. So absolutely, these things are in the manifesto.
Yeah, the next one is systems, something you've spoken about today as well. Recognize, evaluate, and respond to systems interaction. So think about the whole, not just the parts, but think about the whole as well.
Yep, big picture, systems thinking.
There you go. Number 6, leadership. Demonstrate leadership behaviors.
Principle number 5 in the manifesto about trusting your team and giving the support they need to do their job.
Brilliant. That's true, Roy. Yeah. All right. Number 7, tailor based on context. PMI says we got a whole bunch of things. We're not telling you to use every single one. You got to tailor and use them wisely. So that's a message to take back to our organizations that are so obsessed with every process being done. We need to educate them on things like that. Number 8, quality. What comes to mind? So something comes to mind here, Roy. It's technical excellence and good design enhances agility.
And it's principle number 9, if I remember correctly.
I hope so. I don't know.
I think it is actually. Yeah. So absolutely quality first. Great engineering practices always build the highest quality product so that we can achieve principle number one, which is satisfy our customers, right?
There you go. And Roy, you have better recollection of these because you've done them till the cows came home. I'm still, no, I can do them till maybe the ants come home, not the cows. Okay, number 9, complexity. Navigate complexity. I
Principle
like the
number
one
10.
that says simplicity. Yeah, number 10, right? Is it number
That's
10,
it. That's the
simplicity?
one.
So for those who are like, what on earth are they talking about? So simplicity, maximizing the amount of work not done is essential, is what this reminds us of. But Roy has also talked about the Stacy model today, the Stacy matrix, page 165 or wherever it is in this book, it's there. But yeah, you use your agile and you do that. But then again, agile thinking just helps you be able to cope better with this. Because it goes all the way up to anarchy space, right, Roy? Not just complexity.
Exactly.
All right, number 10, risk. Optimize risk responses. Whatever you're doing, make sure you choose the best response in the interest of the outcome, not just yourself, but the outcome for the customer. All right. Anything about risk in the manifesto, Roy?
Not really. It's kind of implied. We don't specifically call out risk, but there's lots of opportunities like principle 12, inspect and adapt, principle number 4, I believe, for getting feedback. So there's lots of different opportunities to help us manage risk, but it's kind of implied.
Absolutely. And talking about inspect and adapt, that's number 11, embrace adaptability and resiliency. And number 12, change. I mean, agile, we call it change driven. What more could we say? Enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. That's
Principles
a big
2 and
idea.
3. You got it.
Yeah. Well, that pretty much is it. We've gone through the 12 principles at a massively high level. But in the next week plus, we're going to be going through the 12 principles one by one. The intent is to next week really dive deeper into each one, breaking them apart. For those folks who might be taking the exam, this is one area that Roy and I believe PMI is going to be focusing on a lot more. They've already started focusing on it. Okay. I could ask my friends, Michelle, Giroux, and Caroline, who have taken the exam this year to just say a yay or nay. Is that a fair statement that PMI have already started going down principle boulevard? Huh? Caroline, Michelle?
Yes.
Giroux?
Yes.
I thought you might agree. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and we're going to stop the recording. For those who have questions about anything, we're just going to stay behind for a few minutes and answer those. But thank you very much for this first week. We have 3 more weeks where we're going to be going through this a lot more detail, and there's going to be a lot more interaction in the weeks ahead. So thank you very much. We'll go ahead and stop the record. See you next week.